isn't working in America. Harry wants out.
It starts with the Oprah Winfrey interview. He's clearly not happy to be there. He's clearly not happy with some of the things that have been revealed. He even tells Oprah, I refuse to go there at one point, where Oprah's trying to trigger Harry to explain exactly what Meghan Markle's talking about when it comes to the royal racism row. Harry, his desperation to see his father in the United Kingdom in the last few weeks, the way he pushed back on the palace. Harry is eager to make a place for himself back in the UK.
Behind the hyper-exclusive gates of Montecito, a profound and structural realization is quietly setting in for the Duke of Sussex. When Prince Harry traded the ancient, subsidized protection of the British crown for the sun-drenched hills of California, the move was widely heralded as a masterstroke of modern, progressive independence. It was sold to a global audience as the ultimate pursuit of personal freedom, a clean, permanent break from a rigid system in order to conquer the untamed frontier of global entertainment. Yet, beneath the polished surface of coordinated media appearances and high-gloss public relations, an architectural fracture was forming within their operational framework. What the international media completely missed was the silent, systemic panic transpiring behind closed doors as the multi-million-dollar contracts began to experience a severe liquidity and brand valuation crisis.
Meghan Markle's fashion freeze-out. She has been dumped by Balenciaga just 1 year after she thought, this I'm going to invite myself appearance at Paris Fashion Week was going to change her career for good.
The strategic miscalculation of trading hereditary, institutional royalty for the highly volatile arena of Hollywood commercial opportunism has created an entirely unsustainable dynamic. In the open market, celebrity capital is subject to the brutal, unyielding laws of supply and demand, and the moment his institutional immunity expired, Harry's personal leverage was placed on a rapidly ticking clock. We are not just looking at a standard temporary shift in public opinion. We are witnessing the systemic dismantling of a commercial apparatus that relied entirely on an institutional anchor it simultaneously sought to critique. When a public identity is built on a finite resource like grievance, the narrative eventually runs out of currency. The signs of this collapse are no longer speculative or confined to tabloid gossip. They are written directly into the court records, the canceled corporate deals, and the shifting social dynamics of Los Angeles. The prince who walked away from the most secure, historic family structure on Earth is now experiencing the cold, isolating reality of cultural displacement, and he is quietly, urgently attempting to navigate a path back home. To comprehend the sheer magnitude of this systemic unraveling, we must first examine the stark, unyielding divergence between the life Prince Harry left behind and the chaotic, transactional marketplace he entered. For over 3 decades, the Duke of Sussex existed within a perfectly insulated, permanently subsidized ecosystem. In the royal structure, personal status is not a variable commodity. It is fixed, absolute, and independent of performance, intellect, or cultural trends. Your security, your public relevance, your institutional authority, and your financial stability are guaranteed by centuries of tradition. The palace machinery operates as an omnipresent administrative buffer, managing crises before they manifest, shaping global perception, and ensuring that a royal prince remains an untouchable cultural entity. But the landscape of Southern California operates on a fundamentally different, completely unsentimental currency. Hollywood does not respect heritage. It respects immediate, monetizable leverage. The moment Prince Harry stepped off the tarmac in California, his royal immunity expired, and his personal capital was plunged into the brutal realities of the attention economy. In this environment, if a brand is not actively producing high-yield returns or offering unique, ongoing access, its market value plummets. This reality has exposed a deep psychological and cultural dislocation underlying Harry's American experience. The transition from a protected working royal to an active participant in what can effectively be described as the high-stakes corporate gig economy has proved to be a staggering, destabilizing shock. The initial hubris of the Sussexes' departure was entirely predicated on a grand, unverified assumption that their royal proximity alone would effortlessly translate into permanent global influence. They believed that by merely existing as royals in America, they could automatically command the respect of traditional institutions while simultaneously enjoying the commercial freedom of private citizens. In the early stages of their relocation, the absolute novelty of their profound breach of institutional protocol did generate massive, unprecedented upfront capital. Global media giants, desperate to capture the historic spectacle of a defecting prince, rushed to offer staggering contracts. Spotify, Netflix, and major publishing houses opened their vaults, eager to monetize the inner workings of the British monarchy. However, public data and subsequent production timelines indicate that grievance is an incredibly volatile resource with a highly restricted shelf life. Once the stories were told, once the familial conflicts were commodified, packaged, and broadcast to millions across the globe, the initial shock value completely evaporated. The market, having consumed the immediate revelation, naturally began demanding actual substance, leaving an unorthodox business model that struggled to produce sustainable content. They were no longer being protected by a thousand-year-old institution. They were being evaluated by data analytics, viewer retention metrics, and quarterly corporate earnings reports. The psychological toll of this shift cannot be overstated. For a man accustomed to the permanent, communal stability of the royal calendar, the historic family gatherings at Sandringham, the summers at Balmoral, and the unspoken codes of shared generational heritage, the hyper-individualistic landscape of Los Angeles left him profoundly untethered. The reality of his current isolation is highlighted by the contrast between his current lifestyle and the simple, surreal humor of his past, such as the exchange of trivial joke gifts like the bathroom mats or the lighthearted kit given to him by the Princess of Wales. These anecdotes reveal a deeper, systemic truth. He did not just leave a political institution. He completely decoupled from a deeply rooted social fabric that provided him with identity, baseline comfort, and belonging. In the fast-paced, relentless hustle of Southern California, that communal warmth is replaced by strategic networking events, brand alignments, and commercial pitches. It is an environment where relationships are frequently structured around mutual marketing benefits rather than genuine, lifelong trust. For Harry, a man completely unequipped by his upbringing to navigate a world where everyone operates with an agenda, this environment proved to be deeply alienating. The ultimate irony of their relocation is that it exposed them to the very pressures they claimed to be escaping. They sought a sanctuary from the intense scrutiny and structural rigidity of the United Kingdom, only to plunge into an American media landscape that is arguably more demanding, less respectful of boundaries, and entirely dependent on continuous self-commercialization. As their media deals began to fracture and public interest turned into an unprecedented deficit in public approval, the realization settled in that the California dream was not a liberation, but a demanding corporate contract that they were fundamentally struggling to fulfill. The deterioration of Prince Harry's American operation was not a sudden, unpredictable failure, but the direct result of a sequence of critical, self-inflicted blunders that systematically dismantled his remaining institutional authority. When navigating the global media landscape, a public figure's most valuable asset is their long-term credibility. If your brand is built entirely on the premise of speaking structural truths and championing progressive ideals, your personal execution must be absolutely flawless. The primary strategic error committed by the Sussexes was the overcommodification and rapid weaponization of their personal narrative. By repeatedly leveraging their conflict with the royal family across multiple commercial platforms, they inadvertently created a brand identity permanently anchored in negativity and grievance. This approach instantly alienated a massive segment of the global audience, who began to perceive a severe disconnect from reality as individuals of immense privilege broadcasted domestic disputes from a multi-million-dollar estate. But the true turning point, the moment the professional trajectory shifted from a standard branding decline to a genuine institutional crisis, did not take place in a production studio or during a media tour. It took place within the strict, uncompromising confines of the British judicial system. This legal misadventure represents a monumental miscalculation in modern public relations strategy. In an attempt to assert dominance over the British media landscape and validate his years of public commentary, Prince Harry initiated highly aggressive, sweeping litigation against major publishing groups. This move was intended to be a defining moment of accountability, a dramatic legal victory that would fundamentally alter his public standing and re-establish him as a formidable, independent force operating on the global stage. Instead, the courtroom transformed into an arena of profound professional exposure. Unlike a curated podcast interview or a pre-edited documentary segment where the narrative can be carefully shaped and managed, a court of law demands empirical evidence, rigorous cross-examination, and objective validation. For a public figure accustomed to having their assertions accepted without structural challenge, this environment proved to be incredibly perilous. When the High Court handed down its judgment, the result was a comprehensive dismantling of Harry's legal and personal credibility. The issue was not merely that he lost the case, it was the specific, devastating language utilized by the judiciary to explain the ruling. When a respected High Court judge formally concludes that a public figure's testimony lacks consistency, depth, and empirical support, essentially stating that they are not a credible witness, the corporate ramifications are immediate and catastrophic. In the global commercial landscape, major corporations and blue-chip brands do not assess public figures through the lens of emotional loyalty or ideological sympathy. They view them strictly as investment vehicles designed to protect and enhance corporate equity. The moment a public figure is judicially compromised, they become highly toxic to mainstream commercial entities. A corporate brand looking for a global ambassador or a high-status thought leader cannot align themselves with an individual whose fundamental reliability has been explicitly criticized by a court of law, as it introduces an unacceptable level of risk to their brand equity. Furthermore, the operational handling of the aftermath highlighted an increasingly erratic pattern of behavior. Bypassing standard protocol to launch immediate, emotionally reactive attacks on judicial rulings does not project power or authority. It projects a deep sense of entitlement and an inability to accept institutional boundaries. This combative posture had an immediate, chilling effect on his professional prospects in the United States. The American market is inherently pragmatic and results-oriented. While the American public initially embraced the high-drama narrative of personal reinvention, they have very little tolerance for protracted, unproductive legal battles that result in repeated failure. By consistently anchoring his public identity to past grievances and legal losses, Harry inadvertently violated the primary rule of American celebrity culture, which dictates that you must always be building toward a compelling, aspirational future. Instead, his public appearances began to take on a disjointed, non-sequitur quality, as demonstrated by his recent address to a real estate convention in Toronto. When a corporate entity pays a premium fee for a high-profile keynote speaker, they are investing in an experience designed to motivate, inspire, and elevate their audience. They expect a forward-thinking, high-level address that aligns with corporate goals and professional growth. However, utilizing that corporate platform to pivot into deeply personal, historic trauma regarding the tragic loss of his mother to a room full of real estate professionals reads as severe professional misalignment. It signaled to the wider corporate community that he was struggling to separate his personal emotional narrative from his professional obligations. He was no longer behaving like a polished, strategic global thought leader. He was operating as an unpredictable entity, entirely consumed by unresolved past conflicts. This pattern of behavior completely disrupted his positioning in Hollywood. Entertainment executives and corporate sponsors began to realize that partnering with the Sussexes did not yield the smooth, high-status prestige they had anticipated. Instead, it brought an unstable mixture of personal litigation, public controversy, and unpredictable narrative pivots. The primary asset they had sought to acquire, the effortless, unifying authority of the British monarchy, had been replaced by a complicated web of corporate risk and public relations management. As the doors of major Hollywood power structures began to quietly close, Harry found himself in an increasingly isolated position. an independent commercial operator who had alienated his foundational network in the United Kingdom, while failing to secure a stable, respected foothold in the competitive landscape of American media.
He is lonely in the United States, and it's all about the hustle here in LA. And that is not a life he's accustomed to. He now is in
No.
the gig economy where it's paycheck to paycheck hustling. And that was never going to be a comfortable lifestyle for him.
Every strategic miscalculation yields an inevitable sequence of active consequences. For the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, the fallout from their operational choices has transitioned from public criticism into an acute institutional and commercial crisis. When an individual trades a permanent, historic platform for a business model predicated entirely on personal visibility, their lifestyle becomes inextricably linked to their current market value. In the unyielding meritocracy of the American entertainment hierarchy, status is continuously reevaluated based on immediate success. When a brand experiences a visible pattern of public legal defeats and canceled commercial ventures, the wider marketplace responds with rapid risk aversion, introducing an unprecedented deficit in public approval. This commercial deceleration is most visible in the current state of their private business ventures, where the stark divergence between high-gloss public relations and practical execution has become impossible to ignore. A successful lifestyle brand launch requires immense operational momentum, a flawless supply chain, and sustained consumer demand to achieve viability. When a corporate entity is launched primarily on a curated public persona but lacks the necessary logistical backbone, it encounters immediate structural inertia. Reports of defective promotional merchandise and stagnant inventory highlight a deeper failure within their business apparatus. In the luxury consumer market, brand equity is deeply intertwined with the perceived stability and authority of its creators. You cannot successfully market an aspirational narrative of domestic tranquility and elevated lifestyle curation when the public arena is continuously dominated by headlines of intense familial conflict, judicial cross-examinations, and mounting financial pressures. This operational stagnation has triggered a severe liquidity crisis that threatens the very infrastructure supporting their lifestyle. Operating a sprawling multi-million-dollar estate in Montecito, maintaining a global public relations apparatus, and funding a comprehensive, round-the-clock private security team requires an immense, continuous influx of capital. Security costs alone constitute a massive, non-negotiable annual overhead that places intense pressure on their remaining reserves. When you factor in the devastating financial liabilities stemming from protracted, unsuccessful litigation against major media groups, the mathematical sustainability of their independence completely unravels. Legal experts note that the cumulative financial exposure from these failed courtroom campaigns has the potential to entirely wipe out the primary capital generated by Harry's personal memoir. Compounding this economic strain is the total fracturing of their historic social and professional support network. By entering an adversarial legal arena and utilizing erratic public relations tactics, Harry has inadvertently compromised his relationships with long-standing cultural allies and high-net-worth individuals. Icons of the global entertainment industry, who once provided private sanctuaries and valuable validation for the couple, have systematically distanced themselves to avoid collateral brand damage. Elite circles value discretion and institutional stability above all else. When a partnership yields public depositions, judicial reprimands, and negative polling data, the calculation shifts toward immediate disengagement. This leaves the Sussexes operating within a highly restricted social and commercial echo chamber, entirely cut off from the foundational networks required to sustain a global media empire. The erosion of the California dream has forced a profound, existential reevaluation of the Sussexes' long-term positioning. When the parameters of your current environment become commercially and socially restrictive, survival dictates a radical strategic pivot. For Prince Harry, the sudden, escalating focus on re-establishing a formal footprint in the United Kingdom is not a matter of sentimental nostalgia, but an absolute operational necessity. The infrastructure of his American enterprise is actively searching for a lifeline, and that lifeline can only be found by reclaiming some degree of the institutional proximity he surrendered. The protracted, highly contentious battles with state security committees are directly tied to his future commercial viability, serving as a desperate attempt to lower the immense structural costs of his independent operation while signaling to corporate sponsors that he retains a unique, protected status within the global hierarchy. However, this strategy faces an unyielding constitutional and personal barrier within the British monarchy, which operates on the fundamental principle that public status is strictly contingent upon public service. You cannot permanently decouple from the obligations, the discipline, and the political neutrality of the crown while expecting the state to subsidize and protect your private commercial enterprises. This profound breach of protocol has created a deep, generational deficit in trust that a single public appearance or isolated charitable alignment cannot begin to repair. It forces the global audience to decide whether it is truly possible for a prince who dismantled his foundational heritage to ever navigate a way back in, or if the pursuit of the California dream has permanently sealed his position in a gilded, corporate exile.